He is the, I would say, the formidable executive extraordinaire in the sports and entertainment industry, Mr. Bob Gutkowski, former president of the Madison Square Garden. And welcome to the show, Bob. It's great to have you on.
Oh, great, guys. It's great to be here. Really happy to spend some time with you both.
That's great. And we have you on today because recently we were walking around and we found out that you had a book out. And immediately I took a look at it and said, had to have it, have to read it. And I'm sure glad I did. It's called Gut Punch. And it's pretty much the Bob Gutkowski story from beginning to where you're at right now. It's called Gut Punch. What was the motivation for the book in general? And then how did you come up with such a title?
Well, a couple of things. One is, the stories in the book are so rich and so real, and they've not been, for the most part, told correctly. They've been told incorrectly. And whenever I would tell people these stories over the years, 20th anniversary, said, Bob, you have to write a book. 25th anniversary, Bob, you have to write a book. It got to a point where I said, I'm sort of out of the business now, although I do consult. It's time to write the book, tell the story, tell the true story behind the scenes of what was an interesting career. And my family wanted me to do it. My son wanted me to do it. My oldest son, unfortunately, died just before it, but he wanted to make sure that I completed it. And Wallace Matthews, Wally is a terrific sports journalist, just inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame. And Wally and I were never really close. Wally didn't trust anybody who wore a suit. He didn't believe anybody did anything worthwhile. And but he lived in Syosset. I lived in Cold Spring Harbor. We knew each other. We got together for lunch. I was telling him stories, and he said, you should write a book. I said, well, it's time for me to do that. Are you interested? Because I needed that. I needed the real kind of journalism, the good writer kind of stuff. And we got into it. And we spent a couple of years doing it. We couldn't get it promoted by regular producers. That business is a lot different than it used to be. You don't try and sell a book and they give you money, and you have to really go out and do it on your own. But I decided to do it complete about a year ago, around the 30th anniversary of the Rangers Stanley Cup, and I just tried to tell the behind-the-scenes story that goes on in a long executive's career, and how very much the true story about '94, both on the Knicks side and certainly on the Rangers side, was always misrepresented, was always lied about, was never told truthful, and I, being in the middle of it, thought it was important to finally tell the story. So we did. And Wally wrote a great book, and he came up with the name Gut Punch. I was going to call it. What was I going to call it? I can live with the devil as long as he wins. That was something Neil Smith told me. But we thought that was a little bit more, to inside baseball, as Wally says. So he came up with the name Gut Punch, and it's worked well. I'm really happy with it. So it says it, and it's sort of me punching back on some people who have not been truthful in telling stories that I've been associated with.
Well, you had a very, very storied career. I mean, I've even learned so much about the beginnings. I mean, you were definitely not one of those guys who was born into this type of life. You came, you talk about people who have these American success stories, and you are it, my friend. The best part about it, though, of course, is that you started off in Uniondale, where Ray and I started off. So we had to ask that question, growing up a Ranger fan, as you did, because guys our age, the Rangers were around before the Islanders. And, we played our hockey in the street, too, before we put on skates. And then the Islanders come to town. But were you born on the island, or were you like the rest of us, born in Brooklyn and came here with our parents?
Yeah, I wasn't born in Brooklyn. I was born in New York City, between Avenue C and Avenue D on 12th Street. We moved out to Uniondale when I was 6. My brother was just being born, and my stoop at my street, Pembroke Street, you could look down Gilroy Avenue, and right across Hempstead Turnpike was
Oh,
Coliseum. So I would sit there and I could almost watch them build the Coliseum.
Okay,
that's
hold it.
that's
We got to stop you right there. You said Gilroy Avenue, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I tell him, Ray? You want to tell? Well,
no. I was
we
gonna say
grew up
we were gonna ask you, Bob, like where are
in the
you
part of
did you grow
Unionville you were
up?
from.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so
Pembroke Street, Gilroy came down from Hempstead Turnpike.
yep.
At the end of Gilroy, there was a house right across the street from it. That was me. And
Oh my God.
There's Cunningham, all that kind of stuff. You guys grew up in Uniondale? Where'd you live?
We lived on the corner of Lindy Place and Gilroy Avenue, one block from the turnpike where the Coliseum
One
was
block
being
from
built
you.
too. We
Well,
were,
two
yeah, we
blocks.
were like 2 blocks from you.
2 blocks. It was Cambria, and then it was Pembroke. Yeah.
God almighty. And what's interesting is, you grew up a Ranger fan because there were only 6 teams and you loved it. But when the Islanders came on board, I, with my youngest son at that point, really got into the Islanders. I recall my buddy at the NHL to give me tickets, and Clark Gillies eventually became a great friend of mine because we joined the same country club, played golf, went on golf trips together, and Bobby Nystrom and Billy Smith. And I had such a fondness and respect for those guys. I absolutely love Clark Gillies. I mean, he just was a mountain of a man who went too early, but cared about so many people, and was the funniest son of a bitch I ever met in my life. I adored him. He was an unbelievable player. He didn't know this, but behind the scenes, I was involved in trying to get him into the Hall of Fame because he was turned down a year or two, which to me,
That's the last time we spoke. Absolutely.
and he wouldn't hurt a fly except on the rink. And he would protect his players, and he's a great winger and great golfer, and a great comedian, and I miss him. He was lovely. So I had this Islander bent also, which went along with my Ranger bent, which I grew up as a Ranger fan because that's all we had.
Right.
Just to get to know those guys and be involved, and really wanted to help that organization, and with the terrible deal that they had, and never came to fruition for a couple of reasons. But I've always been a Ranger guy for sure, obviously, but Islanders were my secondary love, and they had some of the greatest players. And I say many times in speeches that in the history of New York, there's been 2 dynasties: there's been the Yankees and the Islanders. That's it.
That's
No
it.
other team in New York has been a dynasty other than the Yankees and the Islanders, and that tells you about that franchise, that management, Bill Torre, all those guys. They were just fascinating, and we never really had that at the Garden. We had it for a short period, and then fortunately, egos got in the way, and we lost it. But I was pleased to be involved in the run for the cup.
You mentioned in the book, Bob, that you really feel that if you were able to keep Mike Keenan on, that the Rangers really could have had a good run. They really were set up for a dynasty. They pretty much kept that team together for the most part. I mean, guys like Larmer and a few other guys kind of left right away, but for the most part, that team, the core of that team, stayed together for many years. So I'm just curious because I was reading it, and you're more the executive representing ownership guy, but you definitely can tell you have a keen insight into what from the hockey perspective. So I'm just curious, what was it that made you have that feeling? Because I know you mentioned if you had to make a choice, Smith would have gone, Keenan would have stayed, and you think if that was the case, Keenan probably would have taken them at least to one more, maybe another cup.
Yeah, I believe that. I think it was a collective effort. When I left the Garden, people said you should write a book. I said, it's too ugly to write, man. But it was a collective effort that had to occur that year, I think, ultimately for the win to come. I think Smith was a very good general manager, for sure, did some very good things. I think Keenan was a piece that we had to have at that particular point in his career with those players at that time, at that age. And I think Mess was such a leader, and the team was on his shoulders, that I did believe we certainly had a chance for the next year. I don't know about the third year because I don't know if I would have called it a dynasty like the Islanders. but I think we could have won two, maybe three. Unfortunately, personalities, egos, that comes into play all the time in sport, got involved and it splintered. Plus, the guard was being sold. So I was going to be gone. I couldn't keep it together, which I very much wanted to be because I thought for the fans, we owed every effort we could make to win it again. I used to go out all the time in bars at Clark Gillies and we'd introduce ourselves to people around. And I would say, between us, we have 5 rings. He had 4 and I had 1. I thought I'd be much more, but I believe that very strongly because it was a solid team and they weren't owned yet. There was going to be a period in a year or two in Messier's next contract, but I really believe with Keenan, and Keenan wanted to win it all, and so did Smith, but Smith didn't want to win it with Keenan, and ultimately that was the breakup.
When you go in depth, which I think is really, really intriguing, as far as in the chapter that we actually talk about a couple of different times because of the way things were panning out with your career. I was wondering in there, being a guy that was just, number one, so well known as just being on top of your game, but because of, maybe there's a little professional animosity between the incoming group and you who were actually in the garden at the time running the show. Even knowing they were coming in and your job was probably going to be gone once it's sold, you still fought like hell to keep that relationship between Keenan and Smith together, and on more than one occasion. And then they were playing games behind your back as well. How did you keep it all together, mentally? I mean, that to me showed, number one, just personal strength, but also a level of professionalism that you don't see a lot. I mean, how did you get yourself through all that?
It wasn't easy. I mean, there were difficult days for sure. I knew I was going to be gone when Cablevision was coming in. There was no doubt about that. They didn't want me, and I didn't want them. But I believed we had to do everything as an organization to win the cup again for our fans who hung in there for so long, who had the chance of 1940 coming out of their ears, that the most important thing we had to do in this thing was be professional. I'll go off and do something else, whatever it's going to be. But this collective together, although difficult to live with, was successful. And the sad part was that I believe Smith made Keenan a better coach in some ways, and Keenan made Smith a better general manager. Neil did trades that Keenan wouldn't do. But the personalities were so different. Neil Smith was very controlling, as with Roger Nielsen, and yet Mike Keenan was his choice because he knew he was on his last legs, and we all supported that. I was concerned because I thought of the personality conflict that was going to occur. Somebody asked me right after, when did you think it wasn't going to work? And I said, right when they got back from the honeymoon in Hawaii. I knew this relationship was destined to not work, sadly. But for that period of time, they worked with each other, they helped each other, they made each other better. Each had his flaws. I had my flaw. But the team was that good, and Messier was so in control of it, which is one of the things that drove Neil Smith crazy because he hated the fact that Mark was in control and not him. But it was a reality. I mean, I've never seen players look up to a person as they looked up to Mark Messier. So I believe we had to do everything we could for the good of Madison Square Garden, its future, and most importantly, its fans. They had unbelievable fans, and winning it was so great. I was saying we couldn't do it again. It's too bad.
And what a lot of people don't realize also, or maybe don't remember because the Rangers were successful, that the Knicks were also running for a championship at the time. Took it to a game 7, and you were all over that as well. Maybe the tuxedo was the difference. I don't know. But you have to tell us all the tuxedo story. And I'm saying this not only because it's in your book, but before the Rangers won the cup, and I had never heard of Bob Gutkowski. Just in the regular sports thing. I mean, I guess if I was a Ranger fan and followed them, I might have heard your name. But when the Rangers won the cup, they swept the Islanders in the first round, I believe, and I followed them. And when they won it, I remember seeing this really classy looking dude come out there in a tuxedo. He lifted the puck. He's got the silver hair and the silver beard, and I said, you know what? And I told Ray this. I told my wife that at the time, and I said, why can't we have something like this? Because we had a mess going on even back then, and I said, who is this guy? You know, tell us about the tuxedo and how that moved forward.
It's a great story. It's a true story. You know, a lot of people, including my co-writer Wally Matthews, just thought I was, you know, so impressed with myself that I would put on a tuxedo. But the reality is, we won Game 7 against New Jersey, which was unbelievable, well documented in the book. And the first game of the, by the way, I remember being up at Tribeca Grill the night we won the 7th game, where Drew Nearpont, who was the owner of the Tribeca Grill, opened it up for us like at 1 o'clock in the morning with some of us and our wives. And I was there with Smith and Keenan and my wife, and I asked Keenan, how's the goalie? Because we just went through an incredible rookie goalie in New Jersey. How's the goalie in Vancouver? And he said, he's better. And that made me depressed me. So we lost the first game. You know, lost the first game in your house. That's a tough loss. And a dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine, Mike Traeger, was getting married. And he had sort of a bachelor party at 21 that night. And obviously I would go, but I couldn't stay. But it was tuxedo only at 21. So the great restaurant, legendary restaurant. So I put my tuxedo on. I went, we toasted, I had a drink, and I went back and got second period, sitting down with my seats and my wife and my children, and we wound up winning, thankfully. And all the fans started coming down to me saying, Bob, this is great. Don't ever take the tuxedo off. Don't take the tuxedo off. I said, are you kidding me? Don't take it off. The next day, my assistants were inundated with calls from fans. Make sure Bob worked on the tuxedo and stuff like that. It was Game 3. It was in New Jersey. I couldn't go because I had made a commitment for my wife out in Long Island, and it was important to be there. And it was non-tuxedo, so we went. And we got home, and I'm laying in my bed in my underwear, watching period 3, and it becomes tied again. And I go, holy shit, let me see if this works. And I went into my closet, and I put my entire tuxedo on, shoes, everything, and I went between periods going at overtime. I laid in bed, and my wife came up, and she saw me and said, what the hell are you doing? And I said, I got to see if this thing works. And as you know, we wound up winning Game 3, and that was it. I could never take it off personally for the Rangers and my fans. The fans would never let me, and nobody knows I was laying in my bedroom, you know, with a tuxedo. I think it has something to do with it personally, but you know, it's a true funny story. One of the reasons when I would tell people that story, I said, you got to document that. So
Absolutely.
I wasn't an egomaniac. We all have our egos. I wasn't an egomaniac. There was something behind it. And you know as Islander fans, we knew as Ranger fans and Islander fans, you're superstitious. And Ranger fans for 54 years. I remember we beat the Islanders 4 games in a row, and we played Washington. And we won the first 2. And I think it was the 4th game, whatever it was, at the Garden. Somebody hit a long shot towards the goalie, towards Mike, and it took a weird bounce and went into the goal. And I said, that's it. We're going to lose. That was it. That's the sign of God. We had a bad bounce. They're going to come back. Now we're 4-0. You know, so you're so damn superstitious after 54 years. You look for anything. And I was like every other Ranger fan. I looked for, you know, anything I could see. And to me, it was a tuxedo, so I wore it.
No, it seemed to work. It worked like a charm.
Didn't work for the Rangers. That was good enough.
Well, you know, during that time also, you talk about quirky little things. Like we were saying, the Knicks were making their run for a championship at the time. They were in the finals. They had a huge game. You can tell us about it if they won it. I don't remember, but here it is, this big game that they needed to win, and it was overshadowed by the OJ chase.
Oh God, yeah.
Is that incredible or what?
Yeah, that was, I mean, that was game 5, I think, and it was unbelievable. I think we wound up losing that game, if I remember, but the whole place was overtaken by this chase. And we tried, and they're turning the TVs on, in the arena to the OJ thing, and we're trying to win a ball game here, and it was surreal. I mean, it just was unbelievable.
They went to the split screen, right? That was one of the things that kind of saved you earlier on with MSG, right?
Yeah, NBC had the game. They had it on split screen. And you just couldn't believe that. And I didn't know what sign that was. I just started missing a lot of free throws that game. And going back to Houston to game 6 and 7. But just another crazy, unbelievable happening during that 2-month period. That's well documented, and I think Wally did a great job in trying to represent what that period was in relation to the last 30 or 40 years, and it was just nuts. You didn't know which way you were going. To be honest about it. And unfortunately, we lost in the 7th game. We should have won 3 in a row at home, but we didn't. So.
That was the year they actually had the shot, right? No Jordan.
Yeah, no Jordan.
Right.
Unfortunately, Elijah outplayed Ewing. And I love Patrick, and he gave it his all, but he couldn't take the team and put it on his shoulders like Messier. Messier had all them absolutely located on his shoulders. Patrick couldn't do it as best as he could. And unfortunately, that year too, one of the things I was always concerned about is that as Jan Starks went, we went. And John, wasn't really a natural 2. He was a good 2 coming off the bench. He was a great, unbelievable spark. And he usually during that season had a great game followed by a bad game. And that's one of the things that I personally was always really concerned about, although he was a terrific player. Played his heart out for the franchise, but came up short in that game 7, and that was unfortunate.
So Bob, while I was reading the book, and I'm reading your perspective on things and your relationship, I know you mentioned, and it's pretty well reflected in the book, you had a much closer relationship with what was going on with the leadership on the Rangers versus the Knicks. But I'm like, this guy is like a corporate executive looking out for what's going on, basically with the money that's happening, right? And making sure that things are profitable from a business perspective, but you really come across like a sports executive, somebody like who is more of a president of operations, almost for hockey operations and basketball operations. And it just seemed to be that's how your role kind of evolved. So I'm just curious, like when you were hired, were they just saying, listen, just look out for the bottom line? All right, you're a sports guy, you kind of know sports. We're Paramount, we don't know sports. Do your thing. And then you kind of evolved into that role? Or did you feel like you were in that role? Or were you just more, having to kind of balance, between the sports guys and the financial guys?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd been there for a while at the Garden. And I was more of a sports television guy. I didn't run a facility. I didn't run a team. I had been involved in NBC Sports and early days of ESPN and then Paramount. So I was considered more of a television guy and a sports television guy. But I knew Madison Square Garden pretty well because I had been there. And I had worked for my predecessor. And I saw what he didn't do well and what he did do well. And it's a learning operation, but there was a unique dynamic because it was owned by Paramount. And Paramount had an executive named Stanley Jaffe. Stanley died just a couple of months ago. Stanley came from Paramount early on and left and then came back as president Paramount Pictures, Paramount, parent company. But he loved the Knicks and Rangers. Loved it. Not as much the Garden as the network. He loved the teams. And he was knowledgeable and forthcoming. And when I originally got hired, after my predecessor left, at one point they wanted to make me chief. He wanted to make me chief operating officer so he could control the teams. And a couple of people go and say, that's nuts. You can't do that. There's no chief. There's a CEO who's got to be responsible for everything. But certainly I report to you, so I kind of respectful. The problem with that was that because he was so involved, sometimes, especially checkers, would go around me to him. Smith a little bit less. And that's a tough dynamic to deal with because I'm still ultimately responsible for the teams to him. So it made life a little bit more complicated. A lot of times when it didn't have to be. But it's just what you have to do as an executive. You have to understand the landscape, understand the people. Jaffe and I would go back at each other for certain things, but we respected each other, and that was important. And I didn't like it when somebody went around me, and when they did, I told them that. And when they did, I told Jaffe that. And so you had that interesting, difficult dynamic that was occurring during that time. And it was not easy. But you just had to kind of plow ahead because I was a Paramount guy. I came from Paramount, and they put me at the Garden. ABC Sports wanted to hire me years before as head of sports sales. Paramount wouldn't let me leave. They kept me there. They brought me down to Garden to build up NBC Network. And I made the Yankee deal with Art Barron, who was a terrific executive at Paramount. And that was a sports television changing deal for sure. So I was well respected and well regarded at Paramount. And that helped me too. Because if you came down to anything, most people at Paramount believed me and what I was saying and what I was doing. And that was very helpful. So you had to fight those battles, there's no doubt about it. Every battle was different. I was a little closer to Smith than Checkers. There was pressure on me to get rid of Neil Smith in '92 when we lost to Pittsburgh. And I told him we can't do that. That's what the Garden has done in the past because we've all lived through it. 2 or 3 years and then you're gone. It's a good team. He's done a decent job. We lost in Pittsburgh. We're on the precipice. In fact, we should make him president, just like Checkers is president of the Knicks. So I was behind Neil, in a lot of ways. And Dave was a very good executive who gave him the right to build the team. And, he did a good job. But there was always sense that people felt, those two could go around me. And that was a battleground with me and Jaffe that ultimately worked itself out because we really kind of liked each other and respected each other, but we didn't give in to each other. And I wouldn't give in to Jaffe, and there are a couple episodes in the book that sort of represent that. But I just think he had a fondness for me. That was important for us to win. I didn't have that respect for him and that fondness, even though there were difficult issues. I don't know if we would have won that year because there was a lot of ugliness going on.
Yeah, because typically guys in that position, in that GM position, they're still reporting to hockey guys. And that's why I was saying, like, would they see you as a hockey guy or as a basketball guy, or they just see you as a suit,
Yeah, well, I think, look, hockey guys see you as a suit. Nick guys see you as a suit. I am a suit. I'm a corporate executive. I'm the president. The difference is I knew hockey and I knew basketball. Not as well as them. I wouldn't sit here and say I could make a trade. I had a sense if they made a good trade or not. And I never really kind of forced myself into them ever making the trade. They had to know what they were doing. That's what they were getting paid for. But they did have a responsibility to me, and I had a responsibility to Paramount and Stanley Jaffe. So as long as we played that game correctly, we were going to be fine. If we didn't play it correctly, and you always talk about, if somebody came and became the president of the Garden, I was there, as the president of NBC Network, I probably would have said he knows nothing about network television. And Jaffe didn't. Jaffe didn't know anything about network television. At that particular point, the Garden Network's the most valuable asset. That's changed over the last 30 years. But at that point, NBC Network with the Yankee baseball deal. It was the most powerful asset in local sports television. So, and then we got a lot of entertainment. We got to really build it up. I was interested in all aspects of it. And that's why I love the job, because if it was one issue, one day it was another issue, the next day, you're always trying to support your people. Even though I had some issues with them, I tried to support them in every way possible. And most of the time successfully, but not all the time. There's no executive that's successful all the time.
So coming out of the that '94 season, you had the Cup, you had the Knicks near a championship, seventh game final loss, and you were also getting the Garden back in the entertainment industry with the concerts. It was becoming a destination again, and also with the boxing. I mean, you were all over that with boxing. So moving forward, after you were forced out of the Garden, you got involved with SFX, I believe, in the Marquee Group.
Yeah.
And once that started to formalize, you made that move to try to maybe do the same thing with the Islanders and the Coliseum, because they were having so much trouble with ownership there, and so much trouble with the building, and so much trouble with the county, you know, and dealing with them. Tell us a little bit about how it morphed into that, and a little bit of your experience when you tried to buy the Islanders, because I think you actually made 2 plays for it, right?
Yeah, we did. It was interesting. After the Garden, Cablevision bought the Garden. I was going to be gone. And, I remember standing on the ice holding up the cup and just twirling around slowly and seeing all the fans in their faces. And I said, I don't know if there's ever going to be a greater night at Madison Square Garden. I mean, it was so unbelievable. Even if the Knicks win, it wasn't like, like the Rangers winning. So the next question is, what do you do? I'm still in my 40s, 46 or so. What do I do? And I had this vision of rolling up companies into a global sports market television representation company. I used IMG, which I'm not so sure fans know of, but it was a gentleman named Mark McCormick who was legendary and built a company called IMG, which was massive, with Arnold Palmer as his first client. And they were unbelievable. They were involved in all aspects of the business. And I wanted to try and build that and replicate that. And to do that, you needed money and you needed acquisitions. That was very important. And there was a gentleman named Bob Silliman who, at that point, was the head of SF, the owner of SFX Broadcasting, which was a radio consolidation. He owned about 100 radio stations. His partner was Cousin Bruce. He and I, he was a fan of mine for various reasons, and I sat down with him and I told him I was interested in doing it. And he said he wanted to get involved. So we started getting a couple of companies together, a couple of companies I knew. We started rolling up companies. That really became very fascinating. We represented and produced Arliss on HBO at a company that we bought. We bought Michael Jordan's representation company, represented Michael Jordan, David Beckham over in the UK, because that was fascinating. And during that period, as you know, the Islanders went through horrible ownership issues. John Spano, Gary Bettman called me up. John Spano still owes me $20,000, by the way, so if you see him, tell him to write me a check. But so Gary wanted me to get involved with him, and the Milsteins came in. And it was, the ownership was not good. They struggled, and they had a terrible contract with Spectacor, where basically all of the revenues went to Spectacor, not the Islanders. And it just was not a workable contract, and we had to try and get out of that. And the Save the Islander Coalition, and I could not fund the acquisition, but it would come to my house every Wednesday. I forget their names now, but they were so wonderful, so caring, so passionate.
Well, we were there.
They were telling me people were chanting my name at the Coliseum. So at that point, I was involved with SFX, and with Silverman, he was starting to, I gave the idea to get into the concert business, because I wanted to do that at the Garden in '92, roll up the music concert business. And he did that with SFX. And he started buying venues and stuff like that. And that's when we started talking about buying the Islanders and getting out of this contract, if we could, with Spectacor and rebuild the Coliseum. That was very important. It was the only way you could make it work economically. You couldn't make it work with the weight of that contract on your shoulders. So we tried to do that a couple of times, but we were never really successful. We couldn't get Spectacor to break their contract. Al D'Amato got involved. He was very close to the owner of the Islanders. He did certain things to try and kill the deal. You know, in my career, you've had a lot of different people, some positive, some negative. D'Amato turned out to be a real hindrance in us trying to get the Islanders and rebuild the Coliseum. So we, it didn't work out, and I was disappointed because I love the Islanders. It needed a completely new building. It needed to control its revenues, parking lots, suites, and all that, and it had to be rebuilt because it's just not going to survive that way. And D'Amato convinced Warren to do it. That didn't work. He brought it to New Jersey. It was a litany of issues. And it just was a perfect case of a bad ownership, involved with difficult management, never getting its way, and the county taking advantage of it and just not making it happen. And that was too bad, because if we had done it with SFX and the revenue and the money we could have attached to, and our vision, my vision of what I wanted to do with the Coliseum. The Coliseum and the Garden, even though 30 miles away, was very different in the concert business. It was two markets. It was absolutely two markets. And later on, I got involved with them, and I said, after they moved to Brooklyn, I said, what you should build there is a tremendous hall like Radio City Music Hall, real cathedral of music, 6,000, 7,000, because everybody played Radio City Music Hall would come to Long Island. It was a different market. It wasn't so much New Jersey. It was 30 miles. It was completely different. And unfortunately, acts started moving away from the Coliseum. Business started to die. And it was unfortunate, because I think Long Island deserves better. And so I kind of felt bad about that. I felt bad I couldn't pull it off, but I could not. But we tried. Sure.
I'm not sure how much you got involved with the local politics that really wound up squashing the entire deal at the Coliseum. But I was always curious, because we always felt, as when we were part of Stick, that you were probably the right guy to be involved. You're a Long Island guy, you're a Uniondale guy, but the building piece and how much you were involved with the Garden. But it just never made a lot of sense to me or us that the local politics really shot it down. I just never understood it. And I mean, to this day, that thing's a white elephant now. It's sitting there doing really nothing. Where on all of that land, that if you go back 70 years, there was so many plans, these grandiose plans to do so many different things in that area. And now it's really sitting there doing absolutely nothing. And I never really understood why the local politicians just shot it down, didn't want anything going on. They didn't play ball. They didn't figure out a way to make it work.
Well, they didn't have the leverage, unfortunately. This problem goes back to John Pickett. If you guys remember John Pickett, just about the original owner of the Islanders, he made a long-term deal with Spectacor, got money, and basically gave them the rights to develop those 78 acres. He gave it to Spectacor, and all the revenues went to Spectacor. He got an early check. And the politicians, although they were interested in doing it, never had the leverage with Spectacor. And the only way they got out of it a little bit is, as I said, when D'Amato came in. But that's what we were fighting. We had guys in political, I forget who was the lead guy back then. He very much wanted this to happen. He very much wanted our group, SFX, who's buying venues all around the country, me with some background in running a building, Long Island. My vision was to bring in celebrities. I took Alec Baldwin, Billy Baldwin, put $1 million in, get Long Island. Every talent has come from Long Island. So that was the image, but you could never get Spectacor to break the contract. And that was the killer. D'Amato was able to get it somewhat because he had the county in his back pocket, and he had this guy Wong, who got a lot of concessions from the county, including his own exit on the expressway. So it was a very, very complicated, ugly situation between the deal. Once Pickett sold the future, the Islanders away spectacle. I know something we couldn't break, but we sure as hell tried. We tried a lot, but we couldn't put the leverage together. The county didn't have the leverage. They had the leverage over the second. Second had the right. Spectacle had the right to develop the whole 78 acres, not just where the Coliseum was sitting.
Wow.
And they weren't giving that up. And the county couldn't get it back, and ultimately it died on the vine. The Islanders should still be there.
Totally
No,
agree with you.
we agree with that big time.
I respect the facility in down Hempstead Turnpike, and I respect Overview, Oakview, and all that kind of stuff. But they should have never left that building. That whole thing should have been developed. There should have been a Radio City Music Hall put there, and they didn't have this ability because John Pickett years ago sold the development rights to Spectacle. So,
Well, now that you're
I tell you that, boy.
well, where you are now, where you're sitting now, all these years later, are you still involved in any aspect of the business, or you're totally retired now?
No. I got my little consulting deal. I work for a great film and television company here in New York called Atlantic Pictures. I'm on 2 boards. I'm vice chairman. We're trying to bring PKA boxing, or PKA karate, if you will, stand-up karate back. That was one of the originals, and now it's gone down to grappling and wrestling. And I got involved with them years ago when I was the head of program for ESPN. So, I keep myself involved, but I still like to play golf a couple times a week, and I got a fertile brain, and doing things like this. I did another big one a couple of weeks from now. It's really kind of fun. So, which things could have turned out a little bit differently. Hated the fact that Cablevision bought the Garden, and hated the fact that we couldn't pull off the Island deal for Long Island, which I was. But I was lucky. My career meeting so many people. The other one was the Yankee Network. We haven't talked about the Yankee Network and the Yes Network.
Well, like we were saying before, your fingerprints
Yeah.
are all over everything that everybody watches or pretty much does when it comes to tickets, when it comes to the MSG network, when it comes to the Yes Network. You had a hand in all of that, all the way to Live Nation and everything that came out of Live Nation that we see now with regard to tickets.
What became Live Nation was really my idea in 1982, where I wanted to roll up the music concert business under the umbrella of Madison Square Garden Presents, because you couldn't really build out your revenue streams at the Garden beyond the tri-state area. You didn't own the rights to the Knicks. You didn't own the rights to the Rangers. Madison Square Garden was so well known internationally, not because of the Knicks and Rangers, because of boxing. That's what gave Madison Square Garden its name on a global stage. I remember being in London when I was at the Garden, and one of those black cab, very English driver picked me up, and I was in the back seat. And we started talking, and he said, "So what do you do?" in his very English accent. And I said, "Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of this building, but I'm the president of Madison Square Garden." And he looks at me and he says, "Isn't that where they pop themselves on the nose?"
Yeah, that sounds like the British.
It was good, but there were so many problems with that. But getting the Yankee deal and changing that whole dynamic, MSG Network, and changing the whole dynamics of regional sports back then. I was accused of killing baseball. I didn't kill baseball at all. I helped it tremendously over the next 30 years. Now it's going through a different iteration. And Steinbrenner had tremendous leverage after our deal, and I helped him use it, and then he got ill, and I had to sue him, and it was too late. And I made a lot of mistakes too. Did a lot of good things, but did a lot of personal mistakes because And trusting people sometimes is not the right thing to do, unfortunately. But you still know, and that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to write the book. I'm sure a lot of people that are angry at the book think it's all bullshit and not true, but every word in that book is true.
Well, I noticed that thinking that you were feeling that way when you look in the back of the book and you see the letters and the communications and the
Presentation, yeah.
presentations that you gave the Yankees and you gave Steinbrenner. That's you're on a level, no question about it.
When I pitched George the idea of his own network, he had no idea how could you do that? It's the concept. Now I was surrounded by Mike Traeger, who I said before was a legendary sports executive, and Chet Simmons. Chet was president of NBC Sports, my mentor, went over to start ESPN. He started, I went to work for him. I mean, these are two unbelievable, legendary sports television executives. And one day at dinner, I said, I got an idea for Steinbrenner, and we worked it up, and we gave presentations. And unfortunately, it turned out very ugly and very unfair. And very not truthful. I had nothing to do with it. I assumed too late. You had nothing to do with it. I had everything to do with it. He would have never even thought about it on his own. But that's part of my legacy, I guess, when I'm finished. And that's why I wrote the book, for my grandkids to read it and see the true story. On the other hand, everybody was important. In '94, everybody was important for Rangers winning the cup. From Messier to the Black Aces, every single person, general manager, and you needed that issue. You needed that unit, not always working together, but working. And it gave us, it was a good period for sure.
Moving forward, like we said, where you are now, you're in the consulting mode and you're on a couple of boards. Do you keep your ear to the ground, or do you keep your eyes on what's going on with sports franchises in the area, mainly the Islanders, the Rangers too, but we're talking Islanders here for a minute. Do you see what's going on over there now? Are you familiar with the situation with Lamoriello and all this other stuff going on?
Yeah, I think they needed new direction. I knew Lamoriello. He was a great hockey executive for a very long time. But, like us all, there's a sell date. And I think he passed his. And I think he passed his maybe 2 years ago. So I think it was a move that had to be made. I noticed that John Collins, who was a friend of mine, is a part owner, who was a terrific guy. He's not a general manager or anything like that, but he's a sports executive like I was. And if John gets more involved for the Islander franchise, I think that'll be a good thing. But I think you need good ownership. And, I know John, he's very good and caring. I don't know the major owner, but I know John and I know he cares. And I think it's time now for them to put the right group together. Sometimes you put them together, it doesn't last long, like we have with the Garden, but that was Neil Smith wanted Mike Keenan, not me. I wanted Scotty Bowman. Neil Smith wanted him, couldn't live with it. So I think the Islanders now have to I'd like to see them get a good president that's involved in all aspects of their business, and then get a good general manager that works very closely and has a good relationship and a good bond. And I think it's time for fresh thoughts, a fresh look, maybe some fresh players. As I said, it's the second dynasty in New York, and hopefully it will pick itself back up.
Like you say, a fresh look and a fresh start. They definitely made that pivot when they released or decided not to re-sign Lou to come back, when they basically let him go. Then within a day or two, they jettisoned the radio broadcast team that was been around for several years. I mean, Chris King's been here since probably 1998 or 99. Then they're going to do a simulcast. So it looks like they're going to try something different there. They definitely needed something different in that regard to be on a more of a big league level. Do you listen? And this is just me talking, but knowing your experience and you have a relationship with John Collins, do you think that they could look to you, or maybe you could actually in conversation bring something to them from your knowledge with regards to the MSG network, the Yes network, the radio that you were involved in, NBC, ESPN, all these things, you were innovative. Do you think you would still be able to bring something to the table if you got together with Collins one day, and maybe you could become part of something that rights the ship?
I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, so, my son gets past too, so. I know sports television, radio, and all that kind of stuff. I would always like to be helpful to anybody, to use my years of experience. And, if John ever called me and said, let's have lunch, you have some thoughts, absolutely, I would do it, because I have a great fondness and respect for him. So I hope he's allowed to do things. And I think he reciprocates with that. So, if he's listening to this, if John ever wants to sit down and buy me lunch at, what's that place I always used to go to when I was a kid, the Italian place up by Coliseum?
Borelli's.
No,
Borelli's.
Borelli's.
Bill's Meadowbrook.
Borelli's a nice guy, man. So if he wants to have lunch at, pick my brain for at Borelli's, I'd love to. So, I hope he's involved and on the ground. I hope he's involved, works with Gutkowski and stuff like that. He's done some very good things in his career, and he knows sports. And if you ever wanted to call, as I said, and pick my brains, I'd be happy to do it.
And with your knowledge of him, do you think he'd be interested in being that president of the club?
I know what John is. I mean, he had a great career at the NHL and NFL, and then went on and built on location and did very well personally. So, was able to buy a piece of the Islanders. So I don't know. I hope he's active, because he's got a lot of dimension that he brings to it, a lot of background, a lot of skill, a lot of management skill. I think the world of him. So I think he's going to be helpful if he really gets into it, he gets his hands dirty. And I think you got to get your hands dirty with the Islanders. I mean, it's time. It's been a while now. And
yeah.
It's a storied franchise, but some dust has to be blown off his brand here.
Yeah, I mean, it was good to see, because we didn't really know too much about John Collins or Harmon or Shea, the other guy that, because they just recently came in and they're kind of minority partners. They're not in the spotlight. It was comforting in a way to see that, Collins had the background like you're talking about in sports, had the NHL experience, actually had an experience in the NFL. So it's good to see, like you said, Bob, you got to get your hands dirty with these guys. And it seems like the ownership, particularly Malkin, isn't a getting your hands dirty type of guy. He's more of a, kind of a management and overseer type of guy. So hopefully, Collins and maybe even Ledecky or the other guys are going to get their hands a little bit dirty too. It's still a little kind of up in the air. We're hearing lots of different things about how things are getting managed right now, with Lou still being in the picture and he's not in the picture and things like that. All the things going on with the search, and now we got this #1 pick. It's a crazy time, and definitely good to know that at least we have a guy in there. I think me and Steve could at least agree that the ownership cares and wants to do the right thing, not like previous ownerships that we've had. But nice to know that there's a guy that could get his hands dirty, the way you said.
Yeah, as I said, I don't know Malkin, but I know John, and John cares a lot. And a lot of people speak very highly of John because he's gone in and done things behind the scenes, or he's listened to fans. He has empathy, and understands what's going on. So, I think with Malkin, I think probably is a good owner. I don't see anything that says he's a bad owner. But you do like to see ownership involved in that too much. You don't want a Madison Square Garden ownership there. You want a real sophisticated, I understand, I need good people. Because if you don't have good people around you, you're not going to succeed. And it's not that about it. You can't fool yourself. Again, I don't know how much John's going to be involved, but hopefully they'll make the right decisions, get the franchise back on its feet, and really have that brand shine once again like it did, for a lot of years. The Rangers, it's been an interesting ride, over the Dolan ownership. A lot of bad years, some good years. It's hard to win a championship.
But it's always good for hockey.
If we didn't win in '94, it'd be 85 years.
Oh my God! Imagine. It's always good for hockey if the Islanders and the Rangers are both doing well and they're playing each other in the playoffs. That's always the best.
Next to the Yankees to do well and all that. So look, there's that competitive aspect of it. But if you can't sit back and say that the Island is one of the great franchises in hockey, you're nuts. They won 4 in a row. How many guys have done that in the U.S.?
Yeah, not at all. And then at the same time, while having to win 4 series each time rather than 2 back in the day, you had 20 straight series appearances, winning 19 of them in a row, and that's just an amazing.
That'll never be matched.
3-1 against Pittsburgh. Who does that? And they're around this year. And the other thing about Gutkowski and Malkin, which I think is very important, they brought back the ex-players. They welcomed the ex-players. Clark always told me that. Those guys, I remember when I was at the Garden, I brought back Walt Frazier, put him on radio. He had not been in the Garden for 12 years. Didn't feel he was welcome, didn't want to come back. These are your natural resources, man. This is what your franchise has been built in.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Feeling good coming back, all the ex-players coming back. That's ownership caring.
Yes.
We saw so many years of the opposite. And I remember when you were looking to buy the team, and we did speak back then, and you were one who said, "Oh, you better believe I'd bring these guys back." Plus, you were good friends with several of them already. But I mean, just the idea that you have that ready-made resource that they never tapped into.
Yeah, so I think the Island ownership's done well with that, and I think that's a good statement about ownership.
Yes.
Getting the right people is always the hardest job. There's no doubt about it. With Keenan and Smith, we got lucky for a year. Should have been longer, but we did get lucky. And somehow the marriage lasted, but it was arduous because they didn't talk for a couple of months. And there's that great meeting in the book that you read about when I brought him in my office. So we're not leaving here until we figure out what we got to do. And I believe to this day, if we didn't have the meeting, we would not have wanted to come. So those are the things that you have to do if you're going to be successful. And I hope the Islanders get it right, because a good Islander Ranger Devil competition is fun. It's fun for the NHL. It's fun for the area.
Well, I hope the Islander owners read your book, number one. But then again, I hope you and John Collins get together and start talking, because you want to talk about a resource. We have a resource right here, Mr. Bob Gutkowski, who can do a lot of good for this franchise if you guys ever looked his way.
Yeah, well, I think John will, as I said, if he's involved, I think anything John touches is good. It will be good. So I think Islander fans have a bit of a hope there.
Well, that's great. Well, the name of the book is Gut Punch, Bob Gutkowski and Wallace Matthews. And it's not just a story. It's pretty much an account. It's in the man's words. You can feel his personality throughout it. There's a lot of anecdotal stuff that'll get you giggling here and there, but it's a great balance when you have a high-powered executive in a high-powered job, high-stress job, that you can see just what a real person and how respectful you were of the people who worked under you, as well as respectful to the people that were above you. You had a lot of power, but you just knew how to wield it, and you knew how to treat people with respect. And it was really a great read. It's one of those easy reads. I'm not one who reads books a lot, So I really enjoyed the fact that it was, number one, it was interesting, but it was a great read. It was done very well.
Well, I appreciate that. I get that from a lot of people who've read it, and I think Wally just, I got a call from Stanley Jaffe, who was my boss a couple of months ago. He just recently died. And if you read the book, there are obviously some confrontations and stuff like that. And how I represented Stanley was going to be important. How do I do it correctly and honestly and fairly? And he called me up. He was not well, and he said he loved the book, and he said he loved the voice. He said it was your voice, and
Yeah.
Wally was able to do that because Wally was there. He experienced it, not necessarily with me. Again, I was a suit, so he didn't really care for me. But he didn't know me, and as we got to know each other, and he was really good. And there's some things that are not in the book that he wanted me to put in that I would not put in. But the point you made is one of the points I think is most important that I learned when you become executive at any level, that you have to treat the people above you the same as you teach the people below you, or treat the people below you, or how you treat the people below you, prepare to treat the people above you. And then you are a constant individual. You're a constant presence, and you're comfortable in yourself, which is maybe the hardest thing you can be in the hyper world of sports and entertainment and stuff like that. You're always looking for what's behind you, who's in front of you. So I, we all have egos. I would not become president of Garden if I wasn't having an ego. But you have to kind of control it, and you have to deal with people respectfully. And if they don't deal with you respectfully, then you got to deal with it.
Absolutely. Well, I recommend the book to everybody. I hope you go out and buy a copy and check it out. It's just a great read, and it's a wonderful history lesson at the same time. Oh, before we go,
Yeah.
there was definitely something I wanted to bring up when you first became the Garden president, and you're talking about tapping into your resources. I believe there was some people before you that didn't quite give a damn as much as you felt they should have when you came in, and the banners were no longer hanging from the ceilings at the Garden. And this fella right here, he said, "Wait a minute, that's wrong. We're gonna change this." So tell us a little bit about that before we head out.
Yeah, I had a predecessor, and he was not from a sports background. He was an executive that dealt in the facility, raised in a music hall, and wasn't really a New Yorker. And Madison Square Garden was a good promotion for him, but he never lived in the Garden. He was not here. This wasn't his place. And a lot of us grew up here. And he wanted to make it more of an entertainment facility than even maybe a sports facility. And he had made the decision to get rid of the banners because that sort of implicated that the Garden was more sports than entertainment. He made that decision, and I didn't even remember, until one of my guys brought it up to me. And luckily, the guy who brought it up to me kept the banners. And after I became president, he told me that, and we put the banners back up. There are not enough of them, for sure, but there have been great players that have, walked through the halls of Madison Square Garden. And one of the things I wanted to do once is do a special at the Garden with HBO. And the special I wanted to do was called "If the Ring Could Talk." And the Ring at Madison Square Garden was there for 75 years. You can imagine the stories that Ring could tell. And we wanted to kind of bring it to life. And it's true about the Garden. The stories that those walls could tell, unlike any place in the world, would be fascinating. So those of us that spent some time there were blessed. And a lot of us had, I think, great respect for Madison Square Garden's place in the sports and entertainment universe. And I think we're all proud of it.
Well, it was a mecca at one point. It kind of went by the wayside for a while, and then you brought it back to life. So whatever it is right now, you most certainly deserve credit for bringing the Garden back to life to where everybody can enjoy it, no matter where they're from. And sports, entertainment industry wise, a lot of what we're seeing these days started with you, Bob, and you obviously deserve a lot of credit. And the book really lays it out chronologically and pretty much in depth. But like he said, in your voice, and it was very enjoyable. And we thank you for coming on the show. It was just so good to see you and talk to you after such a long time.
Well, it's been a while. Thank you. I love your podcast. I love your guests, other than Phil Mushnick. I think that might have been a mistake, but I love him dearly. And good work. Good luck with the Islanders. And remember, the most important thing I had and needed is a good team. Because no one man does anything unless they are surrounded by good quality people who do good quality things. And that's not always the case. So hopefully the Islanders will be able to do that now.
Great. And we're with you there, my friend. And again, from Uniondale guys to another Uniondale guy. Roy Avenue, man.
Holy God. Did you go to Uniondale High School?
I must have walked to your house on my way to school every day.
Yeah, you probably did. Man. That's, oh man. Yeah, I moved there and my parents were there in 54. Way before your time, but.
No, we got there in 63.
Yeah, 9 years. Yeah, 9 years later. So, you know, and Union they have great lacrosse teams, man.
Yeah.
Track.
Track, basketball.
We had some good football teams that I played on, but we didn't quite get the, you know, the brass ring.
I was there, you know, when I was in 10th grade, we won a championship. And I just been blessed. I've been blessed to meet so many different people. So many.
Oh, yeah.
So it's been cool.
You're definitely, Bob, one of the most famous alumnus of Uniondale High School. There's only a few. We're trying to pick up as many as we can as we go.
You can put us all together in a closet, I think.
Yeah, maybe we'll
Hey guys, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
All right, take
Thanks
care,
again, Bob.
Thanks
Really
again, man.
appreciate it.
Hope to see you soon.
Good luck, John Collins. Okay.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you.
You bet.